Sarah Police, mapping your accessibility journey with maturity assessments. AliCamp. Gold sponsors, ANZ, Intopia and Telstra. Silver sponsors, Canva and Coles. Supporters, Rumour, the design recruiter.
So I've got to say I don't normally present at camp. It feels a little bit weird presenting at your own conference. But accessibility maturity is something that I'm quite passionate about, and someone dobbed me in, which I'm kind of regretting now because it feels like a lot to do both the MC stuff and this stuff, but here I am, we'll do the best of it. So when I introduced myself this morning, I mentioned, I guess, my role in AliBytes and AliCamp, but my other hat that I wear is as director and co-founder of Intopia. At Intopia, we obviously specialise in digital accessibility and inclusive design, and I guess it gives me a unique insight, both the work that we do at Intopia, and we actually will celebrate our 10-year anniversary next year, but also I've been in the industry now for 15 years, so not quite as long as Jennison, or Andrew Arch, who's here, who I know is another one who's been in the industry for a very long time. But it does give you certain unique insights into, I guess, accessibility, not just within different organisations, but also in Australia as a whole. So when I started in accessibility, first of all, the concept of role-based accessibility, you know how we talk these days about, accessible design, designers, designing in an accessible, inclusive way, that was in its infancy. Often accessibility was just left to the developers, and accessibility was often still quite an afterthought. So it was approached as something that you check at the end once a product has been designed and developed, and you do your WCAG conformance checking, and that's kind of it. I remember my sort of work history was working with a not-for-profit in the digital access area, which is kind of funny because at the time they called it new media. It was that new, 15 years ago. And after that, I actually went into a UX company, Stanford Interactive. And they specialised in UX and had a very, very strong accessibility team, or UX team that did accessibility. And yet it was always surprising to me how little user research and usability testing they actually did with clients and with people with disabilities. And I think that was really a reflection of, again, the time and how accessibility was seen. It was seen, and we still fight this today, as very much a conformance or a compliance, exercise. That, if you had a site that did meet technical accessibility standards, that meant it was going to work, it was accessible. We have made such inroads to that and so much more in how we do deliver accessible and inclusive products. And as organisations have matured, and obviously I work a lot with different Australian organisations, both myself and also my team, what has started to happen is that instead of just focusing on some of those more tactical elements of how do we make products accessible and inclusive, organisations have started to actually look at how do they measure their accessibility across their organisation, and how do they use that to improve how they actually deliver accessible and inclusive products. And that is where maturity sort of comes into play. It is really that measure of an organisation's ability to successfully deliver accessible and inclusive experiences. So there's some great reasons why to measure your accessibility maturity. First of all, it gives you a way of measuring and talking about your progress. Everyone loves a score sheet. Everyone loves kind of to go, how are we going? How have we improved? And so when you do look at accessibility maturity and also accessibility maturity models, we are looking at measuring, an organisation's current state, Setting goals for that future state. So where is it that you want to be in 2, 3, or 5 years' time? And what are those actions that you need to take to increase that maturity? Now, maturity models when I say kind of all look the same, they definitely all have a very similar structure. They all have certain levels of maturity. Some you'll find are 4-level maturity scales, some are 5, which is probably our preference because that middle point is kind of nice. I don't know, that might be a me thing. And then on the other side, we have what others called factors or dimensions. So these are the things that we want to measure when it comes to maturity. Now, there are many different accessibility maturity models out there. Probably the most common and also, of course, the sort of the open one that anyone can use is the W3C accessibility maturity model. That is still being worked on. Actually, they have updated it recently and have an open call for feedback on that maturity model. But there are lots and lots of others that sort of exist. Of course, a lot of the accessibility consultancies have their own models. The Business Disability Forum also has a more disability sort of specific with technology as part of it, and that also is one that's free and publicly available. And of course, at Intopia, we're like, we know better. Yes, we've created yet another accessibility maturity model. What the fuck? Yes, that is on screen. I do have to say it. I can also get away with it. So I did want to take you through our model. There are certain things I will point out probably as to why we've kind of tweaked or changed certain elements of the model. And that really comes from, first of all, our experience working with organisations and what we feel are those important factors that they are to measure. And some is just because we want to do it, so that's fine. So the 7 dimensions we cover: culture, governance and policy, process, knowledge and skills, procurement, support, and communication. And if anyone is familiar with the W3C model, there are definitely similarities to, at this very top level, just at that categorisation level, you will see some similarities there. The other side of it is, of course, our maturity scale. Now, we were pretty clear that we wanted a 5-point scale. As I said, that middle point is nice. But the very, very first level, which we have termed the dark ages, because we want to be a bit fun. We need to make accessibility fun, don't we? You know, people living in the dark ages, you know, are virtually those organisations that are doing little to no accessibility at all. Maybe if there is something happening, it might be due to a few passionate individuals, but there's nothing systemic, there's no process, the organisation hasn't bought in, you know, that's really it. Our next level is kind of that emerging level. So when you start to see accessibility emerging as something perhaps that people start to talk about, perhaps you do have a few siloed individuals or maybe siloed teams that are doing something within accessibility. But at that stage, it's definitely not organisation-wide. Generally speaking, there's probably not a lot of buy-in from senior executive. There's just a few people kind of working in the trenches on that. Our next category, reactive, is you will start to see more happening in that particular category. But, you know, it might still not be, say, across all of the organisation, and it still tends to be a bit reactive. So maybe someone's made a complaint and you're reacting, you know, to that. Or maybe, you know, there's sort of, again, a few individuals that are kind of making noise about this, but it's certainly not, you know, systemic yet. Proactive is where we start to really get into things. And I guess at that reactive stage, you might also find that your maturity around what you consider accessibility, so coming back to that technical conformance with standards versus actually designing an inclusive product, including people with disabilities as part of that process. In that reactive stage, you're probably not going to have a lot of maturity in that. You might still be, say, doing testing more at the end of the product life cycle, and you're probably not doing much or, with, say, people with disabilities. Once you get to that proactive stage, you really are starting to be proactive, haha. So, organisations at that proactive stage, they're much more focused. They're probably focused on measuring their impact. It is integrated into day-to-day activities. We're doing that shift left. We're including it at the very start of the process. We do have more of an inclusive design process as opposed to an accessible conformance-based process. And then you've got your sustainable, your little rocket ship, that's going ahead. You got your shit together by then, essentially. You are delivering those accessible and inclusive experiences, but also you're always looking to continuously improve. So you're monitoring things, you're looking for ways to improve, you're leaders in this space, and you're not just showing that through what you're demonstrating within your organisation, but hopefully also you're sharing that experience with others. So we have our dimensions down one side, culture, governance and process and so on, and then we have our levels along the top. And essentially any sort of accessibility maturity process is about where do you sit within this particular kind of structure. So I wanted to talk about each of these dimensions briefly, because I'm pretty sure I'm already running out of time. And why they're important to us. So our culture dimension covers how accessibility is celebrated as a core value and shared responsibility throughout the organisation. This is probably one area where we tend to differ a little bit from other models. Often you'll find culture lumped in with that governance or strategy or policy section. But for us, and actually, Jennison's mentioned it and others have also mentioned it today, that importance of culture in driving accessibility forward. I've worked with organisations where they're very focused on that, what are we achieving? Are we achieving WCAG conformance? And the culture around accessibility it's a barrier. It's always holding me up. It costs more time. And yes, you might get an outcome, based on that strategy, but no one's really looking at how do we improve, because everyone's just seeing it as, that thing we need to do, And so for us, that culture and also that celebration of those achievements, that people do is just so integral and important and something that we want to measure. Governance and policy dimension, that covers things like, do you have clear ownership for accessibility and also clear accountability? And then do you have those policies, those standards and the people in place to support your accessibility efforts? So this one, it complements culture, but you can have an accessibility policy, and if you don't have all of the things around it to, support it, it can just be a piece of paper on a shelf and be doing nothing, for you. But at the same time, governance is so important, that ability to be able to have a steering committee, for instance, that might be driving accessibility forward, to have an executive sponsor that is, supporting accessibility. That's all really important to governance and policy. Process, so measuring how accessible and inclusive practices are integrated into an organisation's ways of working. In all honesty, of all dimensions, this is probably for me the one when I'm doing maturity assessments that so much sits under this process element of things. Because part of it is going to be all of those great things, like have we got it embedded as part of our process? Is it, you know, in as early on as possible? But also it could be about, you know, repeatability. So do we have maybe something that's going to be making it easy to implement accessibility, like automated testing tools, or maybe AI for that in the future, or now. Knowledge and skills. So this kind of makes sense, but it is surprising how many organisations kind of start their accessibility journey and then don't necessarily make sure that the individuals within their organisation have that knowledge and skill to be able to deliver. So we're essentially setting individuals up to fail, and in some cases we're actually setting up your organisation to fail as well. So knowledge and skill is measuring how teams are equipped with that necessary training, resources and the expertise to be able to create accessible experiences. And this includes both individuals, you know, in all their different roles and making sure they have the right knowledge and experience for their role, but also the support of an accessibility team as well, which I still feel is important. We don't, for instance, when we talk about security, we don't say, well, everyone else can do security. We don't actually need security experts. I still think that you do need a core accessibility team that is supporting the organisation and providing that leadership and centre of excellence to really, again, help you mature. Procurement, purchasing of accessible products. Now, technically, this could fit under the dimensions. We've had all sorts of debates about whether it does or doesn't, but it's probably, you know, it is a strong dimension in and of itself, and it measures the processes that do support the purchase of technology, software and services to make sure they are meeting your defined accessibility requirements. Support. So the way that customers and employees' needs and preferences are supported and responded to. Once again, I think this is an important dimension. I work with a lot of organisations that are very focused on making sure their digital products particularly conform with accessibility standards. And they never think about, you know, what happens, for instance, if a customer is having difficulty and they do call through a, say, support centre or contact people through chat. Do the people who actually, you know, support them have that knowledge and experience? Have they gone through disability awareness training? Do they know if they're not able to answer the question, how to escalate to someone in the organisation that does have the accessibility knowledge to be able to help understand what that issue is and also help the customer and identify whether there are things that do need to happen in order to fix that issue? And lastly, communication. So communication is measuring whether all your internal and external digital communications are created and delivered in an accessible way. And I swear I should have had the frog by now. Have I got the frog? Yes. Yes, okay, I've got the frog. Thought I should have the frog. I'm like, I've been talking for a hell of a long time. So how do you go about measuring maturity? Define your scope, choose your model. You do not have to measure maturity at a whole organisational level. You could be measuring maturity within a particular, say, teams that maybe support a particular product or particular areas. It is great to measure it at an organisational level, particularly if you are part of a large organisation, because what we do find when we're working with large organisations is often those experiences are, or those pockets maybe of people or teams that are more mature are quite still siloed and you know, exist in particular areas for the, you know, certain reasons. But you could maybe just do it, you know, on a particular team or a particular area. Identify which dimensions you want. You don't have to measure all dimensions if you don't want. then go about collecting data. And when we do maturity assessments with organisations, we do a range of stakeholder interviews across a whole range of different roles. That includes both your senior executive and leadership roles, as well as those people, who are actually part of the, product life cycle. We look for evidence and documents. So what documents exist, whether it's a policy, maybe you have a framework or a way of working document, collecting as much of that as possible, and then also understanding how widely it is used across the organisation. And then also other evidence that might be, perhaps you do want to do a quick assessment of, say, some of the key products of an organisation. Once you've collected your data, it's down to that analysing findings, understanding where you are on that maturity scale. And then, of course, usually it's defining some sort of report and roadmap for where you're going to go next. And then executing that roadmap so that you can improve. What is amazing, though, is that measurement, that clear measurement of where you're at and where you're going. And I think it's sometimes surprising to organisations, although sometimes not. There's usually at least a few people in every organisation who are like, I know exactly where we're at. But sometimes they, ask us to come in because they need someone else, air quotes, to come in and tell them, what they already know. I've been there too. But it is a great way of actually, measuring that, giving yourself a measure, and also then conducting that, whether it's every year, every 2 years, to really show your progress and identify some of those nitty-gritty areas, particularly for organisations that are more mature, where, there was this thing I didn't quite realise that we could actually be doing that better. If you do want, last Global Accessibility Awareness Day, so May this year, we did actually create a free accessibility maturity snapshot tool. So it's by no means comprehensive, but it does give you, for each of those 7 dimensions, about 5 questions that you can answer. And then it does give you an idea of where you might sit on a maturity scale. So it's a fun, great way of doing things, but I've also had people who used it and went, yeah, actually that's pretty accurate, despite the fact it's probably about 30, 40 questions. So just a nice, fun way for you to get started. And on that note, please hit me up if you would like to chat more about accessibility maturity.
AliCamp, celebrating 10 years.